do. You are follow in my pattern.
Hello and welcome to the Ladies' Room. I'm your host, Judy McDowell, and today it is my great honor to have with me Jules Feiffer, the most widely read satirist in the world. Anyway, well, you're a cartoonist, a screenwriter, a playwright, you have an Academy Award, Pulitzer Prize, and now a show running at Bay Street Theater. So, opening night was Saturday night.
Opening night was Saturday night.
How was that?
A glorious event, and I could pass out from joy because everything worked.
Oh, it's so wonderful. And so this all came about, you wrote the book, The Man in the Ceiling. You started writing, you've written over 35 books. So you started writing children's books and books for young adults.
Yeah, The Man in the Ceiling was my first children's book, and it was published, I think, in 1993. And, 94. And it was in the form of a novel, a young adult novel about a boy cartoonist, drawing on my own experiences as a kid wanting to be a cartoonist, but fictionalizing all the events that happened in the book and more or less fictionalizing the parents and the siblings who were partly drawn from life, but mostly made up. And all the events in the book are made up. So it's a combination of emotional truth and a made-up story. Well, I found over the years in doing my work, whether it's in the cartoons or plays, I can't tell stories as they actually happened, because if I know the ending, I'm bored. So I have to take what is true in the sense of life and what I feel I want to get at in terms of a story, and fictionalize it and make up events around it. And that's what The Man in the Ceiling was.
So Andrew Lippa, who is the producer of Hamilton?
Andrew Lippa is the composer and the lyricist.
He's the composer and the lyricist,
Yes,
and he was best friends with
Jeffrey Seller.
Who's the...
But Andrew comes first here because years before Jeffrey came into the picture, somebody gave the book to Andrew as a gift and said, I think this would mean something to you. And Andrew fell in love with it and wept and cried over it and laughed over it, and then got in touch with me and said he wanted to dramatize it. He wanted to turn it into a musical. And he had a show on at the time that was on his closing weekend.
The Wild Party?
At a theater club called The Wild Party.
Yeah.
And I went to see it, expecting very little, because when I go to theater, I generally expect very little, and I usually get what I expected. But I was blown away. I was just wild about what I saw, both in terms of the music and lyrics and the production and the daringness of it and the bravery
and the partying
and all and the sexiness and all of that. And afterwards we went out and had a hilarious evening together, and we started a series of conversations in which I said that he couldn't dramatize it because I had other things in mind, which I'm not going to get into. But years and years, and Andrew would not be discouraged, and he kept coming back, and finally we began work, and finally we started talking story, and then he got Disney to put up an option, and we started working toward a Disney production and on stage, and we had a reading of it, and the reading was a great success, and we were all set to go to Broadway and have a hit play. And then the process of giving notes started happening. And as so often happens in movies, my experience with films was they start giving you notes and everything gets worse.
Yeah.
As opposed to theater, where they give you notes which you work with good people and it gets better. And this got progressively worse up until the time it just died on the vine. And I lost interest, and they were happy to see me leave, and they tried to replace me. But thank God it continued anyway. And I mean, the people at Disney couldn't have been nicer. We just had a different
Yeah.
ways of thinking about all of this. And
So did you keep doing readings and
so,
things?
no, yes, and it got worse and worse. And finally it died. And in the interim, I moved out here, forgetting the musical, forgetting theater altogether because I had begun to lose my hearing. And something happened. I got old, really old. And I couldn't function in the city anymore because the city kept reminding me of how old and decrepit I was. So I moved out here, where I'd been teaching at the college at South Donnybrook, Southampton.
Right.
And here you kind of can invent your own space and your own reality. And I could be any age I wanted to be, but I couldn't write plays because they happened in New York. I didn't know about Bay Street at the time, and I was out of theater anyhow because I couldn't hear. So I had to figure out other things to do, and I started doing graphic novels and writing more children's books. I began to have a very happy life of production out here. And then one day, Andrew Cursum calls me up and says, I think we're in business again. And he wanted to meet his childhood friend, Jeffrey Seller.
They were best friends in Michigan when they were
best friends
kids.
in Michigan, and had done Rent and had done Avenue Q. And I was working on a musical with Sting. And Jeffrey and I met, and I fell in love with him. I thought he was just great. We had a terrific conversation, and I found myself being dragged like Michael DeCorleone. You think you're out of it, and
Back
they drag
into
you
the
back in.
ceiling.
And the three of us started sitting down and having conversations about how we would change it from its earlier identity. And everything was moved around and switched, and songs were thrown out or rewritten. And we came up, all three of us, just sitting around schmoozing, talking, working, going back, starting all over
What
again.
fun.
In the most cordial,
Creative,
but,
synchronistic way.
it was just somebody would come up with an idea, somebody else would come up with a better idea, excuse me. And we worked, I don't know, a year or two this way, both mostly out here, but sometimes in New York. And
Was Jeffrey already working on Hamilton too at that point?
well, he may have started on Hamilton, but he had never mentioned Hamilton at that point. So all I knew were the other things. And so Hamilton came as a great surprise when one night when my wife-to-be Joan and I, who were just together at the time, invited Jeffrey to dinner, who has a house out here. And he said, okay, but I have some guests. And can I bring them? And we said, yes, of course. And he brought Lin-Manuel Miranda and his wife and child. And we had, and he was out there. Jeffrey had given him the house to work on Hamilton. And we had an absolutely
Amazing
wonderful evening together. But I knew nothing about Hamilton, or I knew Tommy Kail, who was going to direct it because he had directed things of mine before. So, but other than that, I had no.
Tommy came to your opening night.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. He's a sweetheart, absolute sweetheart, and I've had great. And the very first show that my daughter Hallie, who's an actress and playwright, performed in, Tommy directed and I wrote.
Wow.
So we go back.
Yeah. And you were very supportive of him in the beginning of his career, so I'm sure
yes, and
he adores you.
and that's why he is who he is today. He's wonderful. He's got the enthusiasm, the freshness, and the sweetness. He's a lovely.
And he directed Hamilton?
He directed Hamilton. Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, it is amazing. It is amazing.
Yeah, so you're working with these incredible people.
It's unbelievable.
So Jeffrey Seller came in as the producer then of The Man in the Ceiling.
Well, he came in as the director of The Man in the Ceiling, who was also coincidentally producing it.
Okay.
He wanted to direct it, and he had ideas about and I didn't know if he could direct or not, but I knew that I liked working with him. And then we went out to Palo Alto, to Theater Works in California, to do a reading. I think the first reading, well, we might have done a reading in New York. I don't remember now, but we did. We were out there for 3 days, doing 5 readings of the play in public. and that's where we met Jonah Briscoe, who played the role of Jimmy Gibbet, the boy cartoonist, out there. He's from out there, and who knocked us on our fannies, and Jeffrey knocked me out because I saw him working as a director for the first time, and it was this kind of low-key, gentle way of talking, and just the way it was with he and Andrew and I, just talking and having a conversation, and how we going to do this, and that's the way he directed, and everybody put out for him because he just made sense out of everything. Instead of cajoling, instead of pushing, instead of dramatically getting up and taking an actor aside and whispering. And I've worked with some wonderful directors, and I've worked with some awful ones, and in Jeffrey's part, he was the least self-dramatizing and the least show-busy of anyone. He just does it as if it's normal. He does it as if it's a conversation, and somehow the results start appearing.
Yeah.
And as I saw that production takes place, just of those readings out in Palo Alto, memories of my first working with Mike Nichols when he was just starting out came into mind. And just as I thought with Mike that this guy's going to be somebody, I was astonished by Jeffrey, because he was an original, and he was already a wonderful director, having never directed anything in New York yet. So the whole experience in terms of how we got into this was essentially stage managed by a combination of Jeffrey and Andrew, and pulling me along in their wake, because musicals were their business, and working in this day and age were their business. I mean, if I were to stage a musical in this day and age, the only people I could cast have been dead for 25 years, because they're the only ones I know. They understood who was around, who was good, who wasn't, how to get this on, and I decided that the only role for me as part of this trio was to be Andrew Lipper's enabler, and to give him and Jeffrey what they needed, or what they told me they needed, and to trust them and trust their reactions, unless I found what they were suggesting went too strongly against my own instincts, and that only happened once or twice. And then we had conversations, and everything got easily settled. So I have been essentially Andrew's enabler on this, and thank God.
And interesting, didn't it start like 16 years ago, this process?
17, but who's counting?
And
I was still a New Yorker, and now I'm not.
So how do you like living on Shelter Island?
I love it.
Yeah,
I love
it's like
it
from another time, right?
Well, it's the late 1940s or early 50s. People are terribly nice and sweet.
Yeah.
If you're doing business with somebody, he actually means what he says. It's a handshake actually means something, and
it's the real deal.
It's another time,
Yeah,
another place.
it's the real deal.
And I'm very happy there, but also, it's a place where I could reinvent myself. It's in a time warp, and I'm in a time lag. So because quite by accident, and I am more productive now than I was when I was living in New York, or for a long time before that, and I'm doing more just because it's easier for me. It's more convenient out there, and also I can reinvent.
And the whole atmosphere is so nurturing and so healthful.
Anyhow, it's been wonderful. And it doesn't hurt being newly married to a wonderful woman who has been this great support.
Also a talented writer. Wonderful, talented, lovely. So what do you think made Andrew Lippa think that this would be a good musical?
I think he identified with the material, which has to do with an artist working and failing and working some more and failing, and the people around you who are supposed to help you give you good advice that kills you. or gives you good advice, which is to their interest and not yours.
They always want to
So-
pop your balloon.
So it's the story of anybody who's worked in the creative field, where you are surrounded by people who are giving you the good advice that kills. And whether you have the ego or the power or the self-confidence or the whatever it is, or the insanity to survive this, to stand up against it, and to not allow them to essentially dominate your creativity and take it over. That's a story that Andrew knew well, any artist knows well, and that God knows I had since my childhood. So that's the story.
Did you also in your childhood have, because in the play there's an uncle who's like a Broadway playwright, and did you have someone in your family that was also?
I had me in my family.
Just you?
I had a boy who was me, who was a cartoonist, and I had an adult in my family who was me, who was a playwright. And both of them had spent a lot of years getting beat up.
Oh.
So it was very easy to do me as a kid and Uncle Lester as me as an adult, getting beat up in different ways by people who pretended they meant well, but they only wanted to control. There's the urge to the artist doing what he feels he must or she must do, and the urge of the other, who needs to control. And control is such a strong part of what goes on in our society, in our creative lives, in all of that, that it's that battle to survive control.
It's also you in most of your cartoons, I find, that they're so funny. Like the ones where the girls are giving you the excuses of not going out on the phone.
Yes.
And then in the end they're like, and besides, I have to get my nails done or something like
my
that.
hair done, yes. Well, that comes out of my own teenage and
Teenage and
years,
early,
where
your 20s.
where somehow or other, a girl telling you on the phone, "I have to get my hair done," was a good excuse for turning down a date. You know,
Oh, and besides, you're too short.
Yeah.
That was the last thing. And besides, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this, I have to do that. And then finally, and besides, you're too short. But I mean, I remember your
Stop bringing
cartoons
those up. You're giving me a stomach
in the
ache.
Village Voice and the New Yorker. I mean, well, I love you, I love you. So
It was the Village Voice mostly. The New Yorker was a kind of
once in a
sideline.
while thing, What do you find was the biggest difference between working on a straight play and a musical?
Well, the control, essentially. I mean, with a straight play, it's my vision, my idea. I wrote from the beginning to the end, and when I find a production to work with a director who I hope will agree with the vision, as he or she has in most cases, it works out very well. Whether the play is accepted critically or not is another story. But I have a lot to say about it, and I think I have something good to say about it. You know, I have opinions that I feel very strongly about. In the musical, my opinions aren't that strong, and I don't feel the responsibility of really being the who-all and be-all. I mean, I think that Andrew and Jeffrey, this being their game, and also they being 100 years younger than I, know what they're doing far better in this field than I do, and I happily defer to them.
Is it odd for you when the dialogue is going on along and suddenly they launch into song, or
No, because that's
totally natural?
Because it's a musical, and when I was a kid, I loved musicals, and I loved movie musicals at first, and I loved Broadway musicals, and I always wanted to write a musical, and in 15 minutes, Frank Lesser and I talked about me doing a musical with him, and that never happened. And then Yip Harburg wanted to take Passionella, one of my stories, and make it into a musical, and that never happened. So I've been flirting with the idea. I mean, you can't be interested in theater without wanting to do a musical as an American, or you can't be an American. You know, it's so much tied up with who and what we are and our identities. It's what helped us get us through the Depression.
Yeah,
that
what's
without
gonna
Fred
get
and
us through the
Ginger and
now?
the Hollywood musicals, it would have been a very different country, because that escapism is what a whole generation of poor people hooked into to think they had a future. I mean, I would look at those movies and see them as documentaries about where I'd be when I grew up.
Yeah, I love them too. I love them too. So when you did the readings of The Man in the Ceiling over the years, did you learn things from did the response of the audience change
The
your
response of the
writing?
audience, particularly in Palo Alto, when we read the first
Yeah.
time Jeffrey was trying it out, was very instructive and amazed me, because these people who couldn't be more different out in that part of the world than I was responded to certain lines so beautifully, responded to ideas so beautifully, responded to the story we were telling, which still was not fully developed, so beautifully, that it was, and we, the last 2 or 3 shows we had got standing ovations.
Wow.
And this is our readings, which set up, excuse me, which set up Jeffrey talking to Bay Street about doing a reading last May. And that was when May 2nd of last year, we did a reading of The Man in the Ceiling, which led to this current life, because it was so beautifully done and so successful, but and a thrill, but not a total surprise, because I knew by then the kind of show we had if everybody was on target, if everybody was doing the job he or she should be doing. And we had Jonah be doing as Jimmy in that one as well. And it was just a just a tremendous experience for us.
And is this final production at Bay Street, which is running right now,
Yes.
is it very different from the show in Palo Alto?
It's the same but different. Yes, a lot of it has changed. I mean, but not altered. It just developed and grew, and the role of the cartoon characters in the show, and how they're used, and the creative, inventive use of the backgrounds, all of that. I mean, the whole, the way the stage looks, which I won't go into because I like it.
I can't wait to see it. I called to get tickets. It was sold out.
All of that I found amazing. I didn't believe what was going on, because even though I was told step by step, I really don't have any, it's odd because people think of me as visual, but I don't have a visual imagination. I don't know what a stage set looks like for any of my plays until I'm in the theater and see what they've done. They will show me a drawing, or they will show me a construction. I think I know. I don't know. I don't have a clue. I can't visualize it. And when I saw what they did, I still have trouble believing it.
Exciting, so exciting.
Yes.
Yeah. So you won the Academy Award for Monroe, which you wrote when you were, what, 22, 23?
I started writing when I was 21, shortly after I got drafted into the Army, and discovered that the Army wasn't the Bronx and wasn't my home, and wasn't my Jewish mother and father, and everything wrong they did was for my good. But everything and so I couldn't be really angry at them. I just felt guilty and angry. But the Army, everything wrong they did to me was impersonal, and they didn't care whether I lived or died. As a matter of fact, when you went on sick call, they say, "You're sick, prove it and die." I mean, that was the attitude,
right,
and that was not hyperbole. They were serious. So so the anger, the rage that I couldn't express before my nice Jewish parents, I could get out at the military and their attempt to control and change and mortify and humiliate you, which is what they do in basic training.
That's what got you into satire.
And I did the satire of a 4-year-old who gets drafted by mistake, tries to tell the Army he's only 4, but the Army doesn't make mistakes, and they don't admit mistakes.
So they keep this 4-year-old kid in the Army?
Yes, just like the current president, he's not going to, doesn't nothing. The Army just doubled down on.
We got a 4-year-old in the White House.
Yes. And
What?
so it's that story, and I learned how to tell it. I also learned what has helped me as a satirist from that day to this, which was, if you really want to express anger, you don't show it to the audience. You make it a story, you make it a parable, and you make it entertaining. And let them pick it up. Let them pick up the rage. If you want an effective polemic, don't do it as a polemic.
And you always have a little twist in the end that's like a light bulb goes off in a person's
And
head
that-
because
yes.
it's so to the point,
And
on point.
you think
It's
that's an
amazing.
accident?
So what blew me away, because of course I Wikipedia'd you, I knew a lot of stuff about you because I've known Joan for years and I've met you before, but I didn't realize you wrote Carnal Knowledge, and that was one of my favorite movies
Mine too.
when we all went. Oh, and I think that when Candice Bergen breaks up laughing, it launched her career. It totally made her.
Well, it helped make somebody like Nicholson as well, because that
Yeah.
was his first.
Yeah. And Jack Nicholson and Mike Nichols.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, no, Mike Nichols was already made, but he had
Okay.
done The Graduate, and he had done Catch 22, which was very underappreciated, undervalued to this day. A brilliant movie.
Yeah.
But that's when he worked with Artie Garfunkel for the first time, and they cast him out of that. But Mike was, who I had worked with before, was a joy to work with, always was a joy to work with. After that, he did a play of mine. So we have a long history with each other, and loved working with each other.
So that it just seemed like a lot of fun working with those people, and Anne Margaret, and it brought her back to
It
life.
was a great experience.
And
We shot it in
and Jack
Vancouver.
got to be devilish as usual, and I'm sure it got everybody
And,
laughing.
and we were shooting in Vancouver, and up the hill, Robert Olton was shooting McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Oh wow!
So it was a very exciting time.
Yeah.
I was in a wonderful position of
We all were
introducing.
young, living in New York.
I was in the interesting position of introducing Jack Nicholson to Warren Beatty. That was nice.
Wow, wow. So everyone should go see Man in the Ceiling at Bay Street, running right now.
Yes.
And what's next for you? I mean, there's...
Well, now that we have opened, I'm going back to my graphic novel. I'm doing a 3-part series starting with a book called Kill My Mother that came out 3 or 4 years ago. And the second one was Cousin Joseph. It came out about 2 years ago. And now I'm up to page 75 or so in the last book, which is called The Ghost Script, and it takes place in the year 1953, and is about the Hollywood blacklist, and was written and finished, the writing of, the text of, before the evolution of Donald Trump into presidential candidate. But the blacklist turns out to be the age of Trump, and that's what this book is.
Excellent. Well, we are out of time, and I would like to talk to you for the rest of my life. So please come back and visit us again. And thank you so much.
Well, I have one other thing to do. That say that at the same time, I've written, for the most popular children's book I did was a book called Bark George. And somewhere along the line, I came up with an idea for a sequel 20 years later, and that will be coming out next year.
Yay.
Yeah, and it's called Smart George.
Smart George. All right. Well, thank you for coming. And thank you for joining the Ladies' Room. And remember, ladies, give yourself lots of room. Room for love, room for fun, room to grow, and room to glow. And go see The Man in the Ceiling. I hear it has a spectacular ending. You will love it.